He slammed the door behind him, his words lingering in the air. Margaret Danvers, widow and ranch owner, didn't flinch. David, her estranged son, had stormed in with Lena at his side, demanding his share. He'd always taken land, taken credit, taken control. But now, that was over. By morning, his name would be crossed from the deed, his claims erased in ink. For decades, she had been his mother. Today, she reclaimed what was hers. When he returned to demand what he believed he was owed, the papers would be waiting. I'm curious, where in the world are you joining us from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates. Asterisk, he glared at me over my birthday cake and spat. Pay or pack, this isn't charity. Asterisk, the scent of lemon glaze curled through the kitchen, wrapping around laughter. Margaret sat at the head of the long oak table, birthday candles flickering in front of her, light dancing across wine glasses and polished forks. Lily was mid-story, Sarah giggling beside her, and for a moment, it felt like something had been restored. Held. Jenna leaned in with a paper crown she'd found from an old drawer, gently placing it on Margaret's head. Majesty of the moment, she joked. Then the side door opened. It wasn't a knock or a call, just the sound of boots on hardwood and a voice that hadn't belonged in the room for a while. Margaret, David. He didn't pause at the threshold, didn't hesitate at the stairs. He walked straight toward the table, with purpose, intent, sharpened like a knife. Lena stood behind him, half-shadowed in the doorway, lips curled in a subtle smirk, prepped, posed. Margaret's smile dropped, but she didn't move. Not now, she said. David ignored her. The lease expires in 30 days. I spoke with Marston and Gray this morning. You've had time. I'm done footing the tax overages. Lily froze with the knife halfway through a slice of cake. Are you serious? David didn't even glance her way. You've had months to figure things out. This ranch isn't a museum. It's an asset. You're occupying it without return. Sarah stood. It's her birthday. He looked straight at Margaret. Then call it a gift. You've got 4 weeks. After that, pay or pack. I won't say it again. The silence was thick, heavy. Even the candle flames seemed to still. Lena shifted slightly behind him, like she was waiting for applause. Margaret kept her hands folded in her lap. Her voice, when it came, was even. You made your point. I'll need documentation by the end of the week, he added. Or I start the process. Then he turned, coat still damp from the drizzle outside. He left through the same door he'd entered, boots echoing across the porch. The slam of it made the glass tremble. Nobody moved. Jenna reached forward, snuffed out one of the candles with her fingers. Lily was the first to speak again. He planned that, down to the minute. Sarah sat back down slowly, eyes wide. Was he, serious? Margaret reached for her purse without looking up. She drew out her phone, unlocked it, and scrolled to the thread with grace. She typed one sentence. We need a plan. Then, she set the phone on the table. The room breathed again, but the warmth had shifted. Lily walked round to her mother's side. She crouched, voice low, close. What do you want to do? Margaret looked at her, really looked her daughter's face, older now, shaped by too many compromises she'd watched from the sidelines. The candles still flickered between them, soft and uneasy. Margaret's fingers hovered above the table. I think, she said, her voice steady, it's time I stopped letting other people define the temperature in this house. Jenna reached across, relighting the candle that had gone out. They didn't touch the cake. No one made a toast, but something important had shifted quietly, unforgettably. Margaret's phone buzzed once on the wood. Grace had seen the message. Lily leaned in, her voice barely a breath. What will you do now? Margaret looked at the flames and whispered, something he'll never see coming. In Grace's office, she looked me dead in the eye. That house is legally yours. The storm clouds hadn't lifted entirely, but the air felt charged, ripe with something, waiting. Margaret sat in Grace's corner office, window cracked to let in the sound of wind and traffic. A legal pad rested between them, blank. The kind of silence that held consequences sat heavy in the room. Grace leaned back in her chair, elbows braced, eyes sharp beneath reading glasses. She tapped the corner of a manila folder. I ran the titles again last night, she said. Everything post-divorce, pre-transfer. The trust was restructured by his father in '92, before the last will update. They never finalized the 2010 quitclaim, and the 2021 addendum names only you. Margaret blinked. Only me, only you, Grace repeated. The ranch house, The original acreage. He's got controlling stake in the business account, but not the land, not the deed. Margaret didn't speak. The words sat like a stone in her lap, solid, unexpected. Grace continued, slower now. It's yours, by law. No contest, unless he files retroactive claim fraud, and he won't. Not with what he'd have to admit to open discovery. Margaret folded her hands in her lap. The quiet pressed harder now. It wasn't grief, it was something heavier, a realization she had never let herself fully taste. I've been paying utilities, she said slowly, keeping up the fencing, paying to fix a septic that never worked right, and still ... I felt like a guest. Grace shrugged one shoulder. He counted on that. The folder slid forward across the desk. Bafta didn't open it yet. Her eyes found the window, instead bare trees, a bent mailbox, a dog across the street barking at no one. What if I sell it? She asked. Grace's brows lifted slightly, but she didn't flinch. Quiet sale could work. Avoid headlines. Clean transfer. It'd give you enough to buy something new outright. Leave the old ghosts fenced in. And if I don't want quiet? Margaret asked. Grace smiled faintly. Then we prepped for noise. Margaret leaned back. The chair creaked under her weight. She closed her eyes for a second, not out of fatigue, but clarity. David's voice played in her mind again, sharp, smug, surgically timed, pay or pack. Margaret opened her eyes. No, she said. No lawsuits, no loud emails or letters. Not yet. Grace nodded slowly. You want to move, like water. Exactly. I'll pull comps and schedule a meeting with the broker. Margaret finally opened the folder. The paperwork was all there, outlined in red tabs, notarized histories, clean scans. Her name repeated like a drumbeat across every page. Margaret Elaine Danvers. She stared at the words like they might morph if she blinked. Grace leaned forward. This isn't a maybe. It's done. You just have to decide how you want to use it. The choice sat with her now, not with David, not with a mediator, not even with the past. With her. She reached forward and placed her palm on the first page. The paper felt warm from the sunlight streaming through the glass. For the first time in years, she wasn't reacting, she was deciding. Grace stood and walked to the printer behind her desk, rifling through fresh pages. I'll draft a soft notice of sale, she said. You're not obligated to send it, but having it ready might help. Margaret nodded once. Outside, the wind picked up. A leaf slammed against the pane and stuck. She didn't flinch. She stood, adjusted her coat, and gathered the folder under one arm. Whatever you do, Grace added softly, don't apologize for outgrowing what never fit. Margaret met her gaze. There was steel there, steel, and something older, something earned. I'm not the one who should be sorry. Back at home, Margaret laid the folder on the kitchen table. She stared at the line marked authorized seller. Her name was already typed. All that remained was the signature. I opened the door to eviction notices taped everywhere. It felt surreal. Margaret turned the corner onto the long gravel drive and immediately felt something was wrong. Not off-strung. Her headlights caught the flash of white against wood, the flutter of paper reacting to the wind like it had something to say. She parked without cutting the engine. The front door was covered in them 6, maybe 7 sheets of paper, all angled slightly by wind and rain. Big, bold print in red and black. Notice to vacate, failure to comply, intent to enforce possession. Her name wasn't even on the header. Her breath caught as she stepped closer. The papers were taped high and low, messy and duplicated, like someone had rushed the job just to make a point. And then, gravel crunching, she turned. A silver Lexus rolled up the drive. Slow and polished, a man in a navy wool coat stepped out before the car had fully stopped. He didn't smile, didn't introduce himself, just looked past her toward the house. Morning. I'm here to prep photos. We're listing today. Margaret blinked. Excuse me. He held up an iPad, didn't bother meeting her eyes. Danvers property. Orders from the client. 1-acre parcel, 4-bedroom primary, plus detached barn. It's already in the MLS queue. I'm Margaret Danvers, she said flatly. Owner of record. I made him pause. He looked up, studied her face, then looked back down at the screen. Your name's not on the client notes. It is on the deed. His fingers hovered above the screen for a second longer. One moment, he stepped back toward his car, tapping rapidly, murmuring into a Bluetooth earpiece. Margaret stood still, the wind pulling her coat around her legs like a warning. Behind her, the papers flapped louder now. She reached up and tore the top one free. It ripped jagged down the center. A new vibration buzzed in her coat pocket. She pulled her phone. David thought his message was short. Brutal. Game on. You're not winning this. She stared at the screen for a moment. The absurdity almost made her laugh. Almost. Then she typed back, "Try me." The listing agent returned, voice more cautious now. "Looks like there's a title discrepancy. I'll need to hold off until we sort it with legal." Margaret stepped toward him. "There's no discrepancy. There's just a man used to getting his way." He adjusted the strap on his camera bag. "Then this should be a clean withdrawal. Do you still want to list?" Margaret looked back at the house, at the notes. At the door she'd painted herself last fall in a shade David had once called ridiculous. "Yes," she said, "but not the way he imagined." He nodded. "We'll reset the file. Start fresh. You'll be the only point of contact going forward." Margaret exhaled, slow and full. Good. By mid-morning, the papers were gone. The wind carried the last of the tape scraps into the field. She made coffee, sat in the kitchen, the folder from Grace still on the table, her laptop open, listing photos loading one by one. The sun broke through around noon, no fanfare, just steady light on old wood and the hint of something new. Then the sound of a stake being hammered into dirt. She stepped onto the porch barefoot, mug in hand, just as the agent finished pressing it in place. A new sign, fresh lettering. "For sale by owner." He dusted off his gloves and gave her a nod from the curb. "Photos go up this afternoon. Listing posts by 5. Margaret didn't nod back, just stood there, taking it in. She wasn't waiting anymore. She wasn't reacted. She was building the exit hand. She had the keys. The sign glinted in the afternoon sun, and Margaret whispered, almost to herself, "Let them come." The email pinged, $560,000 offer. My phone buzzed again. "Stop this now." Margaret was rinsing coffee cups when her laptop dinged from across the kitchen. She dried her hands slowly, walked over, and tapped the TOUCHPAD. New message. Offer on ranch property, $560,000 cash. 20-day close. She blinked. No contingencies. Full ask. Cash. Before the information had time to settle in her bones, her phone lit up. David. Again. This time, the text was blunt. "Stop this now. You're wrecking everything." She didn't respond. The door swung open with no knock, just fury. David stormed in like a man losing footing in his own house, though he hadn't paid for a light bulb in 3 years. Lena trailed behind him, arms folded, sunglasses still perched on her head despite the cloudy afternoon. "What the hell is this?" he spat, waving his phone in the air. Margaret didn't flinch. She moved her mug from the counter to the sink, slow and deliberate. "You read the listing. You accepted an offer," he barked. "That's fraud. You can't sell outright without a release from my holding company." Grace's voice floated in from the hallway. "You don't have a holding company anymore, David." He turned, startled, as she stepped into view with a folder in one hand and her phone in the other. "Your late refinance with Allied Mortgage was never finalized. The lien collapsed, and your 2010 trust didn't vest. I explained this last week, but you were too busy threatening people." David's mouth opened, then closed again. Lena stepped forward. "You can't sell property that's in dispute." Grace handed the open folder to Margaret and began reading. Page 12, Section 4. All title claims have been satisfied in full by party of standing ownership. Secondary parties may not contest sale if they hold no current fiduciary link. Margaret didn't look at David. She looked at Lena. "You should stop dragging yourself into fires you didn't start," she said calmly. Lena's expression faltered. David, grasping for oxygen, dropped the real bomb. "That house is linked to a dormant mortgage. If you trigger sale while I'm still mid-dotted, you'll expose my full liability." Margaret blinked. "That's your debt, David, not mine. You don't understand. If this triggers foreclosure, I lose everything tied to that umbrella: my cabin, my accounts, my rental properties." Grace raised a brow. "Then maybe you shouldn't have cross-collateralized real estate you didn't fully own." Margaret sat down at the table, folding the folder open in front of her. The offer sat there in black and white. "Did you ever think," she said softly, "that maybe this was never yours to lose?" David stepped back, stunned, not by her tone, by her clarity. Lena moved to speak, but he raised a hand. For once, even he understood silence was the only remaining defense. "I'm proceeding," Margaret said, eyes on Grace. He can scream, posture, litigate all he wants. But this sale covers the house, and his risk is not my chain to carry. Grace nodded. The broker's running final checks. We'll clear title without disruption. And if he tries to block it, we'll file the escrow trace and prove obstruction. David exhaled, slow and sharp, then turned for the door. I built this place, he muttered. You leased it to an illusion, Margaret replied. I'm not living in one anymore. He left without slamming the door. That, somehow, made it feel even colder. Margaret stood slowly, her fingers trembling slightly but her spine straight. She looked at Grace. We're sure about this. We're ironclad. A ping echoed from Grace's phone just as she slipped it back into her coat pocket. She froze. Margaret tilted her head. What is it? Grace swallowed, eyes narrowing. Hold on. She tapped the screen. A new email, opened subject line, foreclosure action notice. Allied Mortgage Portfolio recipient, David G. Danvers, property, 1176 Pendleton Lane, the same property Margaret now had under offer. Margaret stared at the screen and whispered. He just torched his own foundation. The foreclosure deadline flashed like a countdown to disaster. Mid-morning sun slanted through the kitchen window, but Margaret's stomach churned in shadow. The foreclosure notice lay open on the table, its bold header staring back at her like an accusation. You have 14 days to cure default before auction proceedings begin. The message throbbed like an alarm. She pushed it toward Lily, voice taut. It's worse than I thought. Lily stared at the paper for a long moment, then her shoulders squared. We can still stop it. We owe less than the offer price, right? Yes, Margaret whispered, but we need the money and fast. Grace already calculated the totals, back-end escrow fees, cleared titles, payoff balance. We're looking at roughly $120,000 in 5 days. Lily drew a shaky breath but met her mother's eyes. We'll make it work. Grace entered the kitchen, hands full of documents, desk calculator in one hand. She flipped the foreclosure notice toward Margaret, gaze calm but serious. They'll send another notice in 7 days, then lock the auction in another week. But if we file the cure notice with the county and transfer funds before midnight this Friday, we halt the process. Margaret's pulse raced. Where do the funds come from? Grace tapped on her laptop. Your sale escrow covers $80,000. Your savings fund can front $40,000. I'll wire it to the escrow account today. That leaves a small buffer we'll need to invoice promptly to get paid. She turned to Lily. Can you get copies of the kicker? Fee statements in County Form 36. Lily nodded and darted upstairs. Margaret exhaled, tension loosening fractionally. But Grace continued. If the buyer stays put with a 20-day close, we clear title by midweek. If the mortgage is cured in time, there's no auction. Margaret swallowed. Then do it. Grace pulled a printed cure form and laid it before her. The deadline was printed in bold. Payment due by 11:59 p.m. Friday. She passed a pen to Margaret. Her hand quivered, but she signed. Grace folded the form, sealed it, and set it beside the notice. Margaret watched Grace log into the bank and initiate the wire, the green confirmation appearing in under a minute. The buffer account sat ready, pulled funds and clicked, then exhaled, nodding. Margaret let the door close behind Grace and exhaled herself. Lily returned, clutching official forms. Done, she asked. Margaret pulled her into a hug. We're doing it. Her phone buzzed another message from David. Stop this sale until I can negotiate. Alternatively, ensure the bank knows I plan to file suit. Margaret didn't even glance. Instead, she responded, Cure filed. Across the table, Lily looked up. What does Lena say? A minute later, Grace reappeared with the listing agent on speaker. As of today, the agent said, voice warm, the margins restored. We can push the closing back if needed, but buyers are still interested. Margaret's chest throbbed. Solid, yet fragile. She closed her eyes. Every calculation, every document, every decision had led here. Thank you, she said quietly. For moving so fast. Grace offered a small smile. You did the work. I just connected the dots. Lily slid into Margaret's side again, shoulder pressed to shoulder. Margaret opened her eyes. We're back on track, she said. Grace held eye contact. Yes, but only if nothing else goes sideways. Margaret nodded resolutely. Beneath the surface, she felt a spark rekindle. The pulse of decision. The hum of agency. She folded her hands, pressing them to the table as though weighing gravity. The foreclosure notice and cure form sat side by side, now contrast in timing. Outside, sunlight shifted subtly, hinting that the storm had passed. But in the kitchen, Margaret sensed the calm before another wave. She looked at Lily and Grace, voice sure but quiet. We've bought time. Now we finish this. The morning after, guilt crept in. Was she becoming the villain? Sunlight seeped through the curtains, pale and hesitant. Margaret awoke to the hush of the kitchen, her mind left over from last night's rush. The house was still, but her chest felt crowded, uneven. She sat up on the bed, blanket draped around her shoulders. The memory of signing and wiring, of pressing sale terms like pressure points, pressed her chest. Had she gone too far? A soft knock came at the door. Lily entered, eyes bloodshot and gentle, clutching to mugs of tea. "Mama, are you okay?" she asked, placing a mug beside her and sitting on the edge of the bed. Margaret took the cup, warmth seeping into her fingers. "Morning," she managed. Lily searched her face. "You look tired." "That's putting it lightly," she sipped. The tea tasted like comfort and time. "I'm proud of you," Lily whispered. "But, are you okay?" "Because I'm not sure I'd like her." Margaret exhaled. "That's exactly it." She set the mug down and turned to face her daughter. "I'm not sure who she is anymore." Lily took her hand. "You're still Mom. Strong, smart, human." Grace's arrival was silent. She stepped into the room with a file tucked under her arm, eyes steady. "I thought I'd check in." Margaret nodded. "Thank you." Grace set the file on the bedside table. "How are you holding up?" "Conflicted." Margaret forced a laugh. "Am I the one pushing for sale? Or am I making him look like the villain?" "I feel guilty," Lily finished for her, like a heel. Grace sat beside her. "You're not a villain. You're choosing for yourself. But I want to explain. Context matters. People see a sale. They'll judge." She paused. "And I want them to understand why." Grace considered. "Maybe a brief statement. Say what you need, no full history. Just why it matters to you. The community deserves honesty." Margaret's breath caught. An emotional short note. "Unpolished is powerful. Just your voice." Grace's phone buzzed. She glanced down. "Give me 15. I've got time before I head back." Margaret nodded. Grace left with a small smile and the sound of a closing door that felt like support. Alone again. Margaret stared at the ceiling. A faint whir in her ears, indecision humming. She rose, moved to the writing desk by the window. Sunlight had strengthened, casting a warming line across the wood. She opened her laptop, fingers heavy, and began, "To my neighbors, friends, and everyone who cares. Today I made a choice, one born of hurt and necessity. This land has been my home for years, and it deserves more than silence. I'm selling it not to escape, but to claim peace. This isn't a departure, it's a new beginning. For me and for the legacy you're part of." She reread, adjusting a comma, catching a rhythm. It was still raw. She typed one last line. "I hope you see this, not as loss but as the start of something better." She paused, took a breath, added a simple sign-off. "Margaret Danvers." She previewed it. No signature block, no legal disclaimer. Just her words. Her finger hovered above post. Lily appeared in the doorway again. She asked softly, "Do it." Margaret clicked. The statement went live across her personal feed and the local community page. She leaned back, hands folded on her lap, waiting for the ripples. Minutes passed, then the phone pinged. A comment appeared. "Thank you, that's brave." Another, "What loss? You deserve this." And then, "Sellout." Her heart jolted as the words appeared in bold. She blinked. The simple note had opened a door she hadn't realized she'd cracked. Margaret stared at the screen, her breath steady, her pulse quick. Comments kept coming, squan a mirror she couldn't look away from. Two competing bids flooded in. A text from David said, "You'll regret this." Asterisk. Margaret sat at the kitchen island, fingers wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea. Lily stood behind her. Gentle presence, silent solidarity. They'd spent the morning answering messages, sorting compliments from questions. The statement had shifted the tone, but now it was time for details. Her laptop pinged again. She clicked. The notification. Asterisk. Offer 1, $575,000 to 30-day close. All-cash. Offer 2, $590,000 to 45-day close. Contingent on appliances. Asterisk. She exhaled. Slow and precise. 2 offers already, less than 12 hours after listing. Her breath steadied. This was exactly what they needed. A second ping. From David. Asterisk, you'll regret this. Asterisk, her throat tightened. Regret. For choosing clarity over control. She ignored it. Another alert. The fiancé Lena had posted on local community threads. Asterisk. Can't believe she's flipping the ranch for cash. Shameful. Comments followed. Asterisk, just trying to pay off debt. Huh? Asterisk, looks more like greed. One commenter suggesting Margaret was hiding something. Lily leaned forward. Mom, she's trying to change the narrative. Margaret shook her head. I'm not responding. She closed the browser tab. Let's focus on facts. Grace's voice came through the speakerphone. Margaret, I vetted both offers thoroughly. Margaret pressed answer. Which one leads to a clean close? Grace paused. Offer 2 is higher, yes, but it has that appliance contingency. That adds risk. Offer 1 is solid cash. No strings. Slightly lower, but quicker and safer. Margaret glanced at Lily. The girl's eyes were clear, steady. How long would it take to remove the contingency onto? Margaret asked. Could happen with an addendum, but it delays close. Grace replied. And buyer may pull if appliances aren't inspected. She tapped the touchpad. The offers side by side in a table. Margaret breathed. I'll take offer 1. Grace answered gently. Good call. She clicked to accept. The confirmation popped up. Offer accepted at $575,000. Margaret leaned back. The weight lifted slightly. A sudden knock startled them. Margaret rose and crept to the door. She opened it a crack. A courier dropped a thick envelope with no greeting. The door shut behind her before she could read the return address. She ripped it open. Inside were crisp legal pages, lawsuit filings, title dispute, breach of contract, David V. Danvers. He was suing to block the sale. Her pulse spiked at follow-up ping. Another text from David. Asterisk, enjoy your windfall. See how far it gets you in court. Asterisk, Margaret closed her eyes. Then she opened them, determination threading through her gaze. Lily, she said, voice steady. She's trying to muddy the deal. Lily whispered. Margaret nodded. Her hand hovered over the envelope. We expected this, she said softly. Now we respond. Grace was already on her other line. Margaret opened the email application. The sale contract confirmation sat there. The earnest check image attached. David's threats felt small next to this. Lily slid beside her, one hand on her arm. They're just kicking up dust, Lily said. We've got this. Margaret exhaled slowly, then reached for her phone. She typed to Grace. Asterisk, received suit. Begin defense strategy and prep for close. Asterisk, she hit send. The sunlight narrowed as clouds rolled back in. The afternoon grew quiet with tension. Margaret looked at the accepted offer on screen, at the signed escrow documents. The ranch forked between them and closure, and the storm circling. She stood tall, closing her laptop. Outside, the legal envelope trembled in her hand. And Margaret whispered, Asterisk, let's bring the storm. Asterisk. The courtroom summons felt like David's insinuation. You're unfit. Margaret's fingers trembled as she sliced open the second envelope from the courier. The first had brought threats. This one was worse. She unfolded the cream trifold document, her eyes skimming over letterhead and signatures until the words hit her like a slap. Summons to appear, civil litigation. Superior Court of Pendleton County. Plaintiff, David G. Danvers. Allegation, coercive interference, undue influence, fraud. She lowered the paper and sat down, heart thudding in her ribs like a hammer on drywall. Lily stepped into the room silently, having seen her mother's face before the words. What is it? Margaret handed her the summons without speaking. Lily read quickly, her lips tightened. He's accusing you of manipulating the sale. Margaret nodded. Of pressuring him during emotional duress. He's implying I took advantage. Lily's face darkened. That's disgusting. The door creaked, and Grace entered, already pulling a set of notes from her tote. I heard, she said simply. Just got the docket and notice myself. Margaret pressed her hands against the table. He's calling me a manipulator. Grace. Grace took a breath. He's trying to delay the sale by painting you as unstable. He knows it's baseless, but the courtroom isn't about truth, it's about performance. We need to prepare you for how this will look. Lily stood behind Margaret now, one hand on her mother's shoulder. I'm not going to let him paint her as weak, Lily said quietly. Grace nodded. You'll be a witness, Lily. So will I, but Margaret, this means direct cross. He'll likely testify. You'll hear things designed to rattle you. Margaret met her eyes. Let him. Grace lowered her voice. There's something else. She pulled a printed email from the folder and laid it flat. Court. Appearance date. May 12th. Margaret's mouth parted slightly. That's Mother's Day. No one spoke for a moment. The irony wasn't subtle. The pain wasn't either. Lily swallowed. He planned that. Grace nodded once. He requested it, citing symbolic closure. Margaret stared at the table. The words, "You're unfit," echoing in her chest like gunfire. It wasn't about the house anymore. It was about erasing her worth or voice. She stood slowly, walked to the window. Outside, wind rustled the trees. The ranch shimmered with light. The barn, the porch, even the gravel driveway felt like memory she hadn't claimed until now. "I'll speak," Margaret said. "I'll write a full statement, and I'll read it, under oath." Lily reached for her hand. "You won't be alone. I know." Margaret's voice was low, but aligned. "But I have to speak it. All of it." Grace pulled out her laptop. "Then we begin. I'll prepare opening statements. We'll rehearse testimony. You'll be ready." Margaret walked to her desk. She pulled open the drawer and removed the old yellow legal pad she hadn't touched since the divorce. It was lined with 1,000 unsaid things. She tore out a fresh sheet. "I let him write my story for too long," she said. "Now I get a turn." The page in front of her stayed blank for only a second. Then the pen moved her name at the top, followed by truth she was no longer afraid of. Outside, the wind picked up as a storm gathered across the ridge, and inside, Margaret whispered, "Let him try." Mother's Day brunch froze as a sheriff handed her court papers. The ranch house, usually humming with warmth, fell silent beneath the Mother's Day brunch din. Plates of quiche and fresh berries sat mostly untouched on the long farmhouse table. Margaret glanced at each face, Lily's gentle alertness, Sarah's soft smile, David's fiancé's stiff posture, even Jenna's sympathetic gloom. She'd expected tension. This was deeper. She lifted her glass for a toast. "To family," she began, voice steady. "To new beginnings." A soft knock interrupted the moment. All eyes turned as a uniformed sheriff stepped through the doorway, hat in hands. His presence felt like the weight of something much larger than him. Margaret's breath caught. Lily reached for her mother's hand. Margaret nodded to the sheriff. He unfolded an envelope and spoke kindly. "Margaret Eleni Danvers, I have court documents for you. Service by officer." He placed the papers gently beside Margaret's untouched plate. The clinking of silverware stopped. The room held its breath. David's fiancé's lips parted in a sharp edge of satisfaction. David stilled, jaw tight. Margaret closed her eyes briefly, then opened them wide. She inhaled. "Thank you," she said, voice firm, as she took the documents and stood. "I'll handle this." No shaking, no hesitation. The sheriff nodded and backed away, leaving silent authority in his wake. A gasp rose from Jenna. Lily squeezed Margaret's hand. "Mom," Lily whispered, Dodd. Margaret looked around. "We proceed," she said, voice hushed but unwavering. She smoothed the papers, glanced at the header, civil litigation, hearing officer included, place and time scribbled near the bottom. Sarah stood and gathered plates. "Can I help?" Margaret nodded. "Actually, yes." Her voice quiet and factual. Sarah moved to her side. A soft murmur passed through the room as guests gathered empty teacups, quiet as mourners. Lena cleared her throat, voice low and brittle. "Always full of surprises," she said in Margaret's direction. She sat stiffly, eyes narrowed. Margaret didn't react. She slipped the documents into her purse. The door opened again. A man in a blazer entered, not part of the weekend crowd, a business reporter from the Pendleton Gazette, camera and notebook in hand. "Ms. Danvers," he asked, voice polite but firm. He held out a recorder. "Are you prepared to comment on today's service?" Margaret froze momentarily. Mother's Day brunch had turned field interrogation. Lily stood beside her, face calm and strong with pride. "I'm processing it," Margaret said, voice clear. "I don't have a statement right now." The reporter nodded, but didn't leave. He clicked a pen and waited. The air crackled with expectation. Sarah crossed to Lily's side, offering comfort. Jenna hovered near the sink, unsure where to plant her loyalty. Margaret looked at her daughter. Lily raised her eyes steady, unwavering. "I'm proud, Mom," she whispered. Margaret felt a surge digging deeper. She took a breath. "No one here is walking away." She addressed the reporter again. "When I'm ready, you'll hear from me." The reporter gave a small nod, then backed toward the door. He stopped at the threshold. "Thank you, Ms. Danvers." He turned and stepped out. The hushed sound of his recorder clicking echoed faintly after he left. Inside, the silence returned different. Now, heavy, layered, like the rustle of pine after rain. Margaret lifted the brunch spread, placing dishes into her arms. Each plate felt heavier, charged with intent now. She moved carefully, collecting memories and responsibilities. Lily assisted, passing her teacup. "Brunch isn't over, you know." Margaret offered a small smile, genuine beneath the weight. "Let's finish it then." She set dishes aside, returning to the chair at the head of the table. She carried the sheriff's papers in one hand and Monterey tea in the other, two sides of a complicated day. Guests shifted, finding seats again. The candles burned low, but steady. Margaret cleared her throat. "This moment isn't what I'd planned for, but double quotes." She paused, eyes meeting each face. "It's ours. Let's not hand this day to fear." The room exhaled softly. Forks tapped plates. Lily resumed her seat, straight-spined. Margaret lifted her glass once more. To bravery, not in spite of struggle, but because of it. Glasses chimed. The ranch around them sighed in the breeze, alive and defiant. As laughter tentatively picked back up, the reporter's voice came again, just outside the window. "Ms. Danvers, may I quote you?" Margaret's heart pinched. She paused, mid-toast, ready for whatever came next. Headlines blazed. "Mom takes a stand against her son." Margaret stared at the headline on her laptop, the sun carving shadows across the kitchen floor. "Mom takes a stand against her son." It wasn't praise. It carried weight and admission, a reckoning. She scrolled past the article's lead, which framed her actions as a mother who refused to back down when her own child sued her. The byline glowed, Pendleton Gazette, author Jake Harper. She read the entire piece, noting the quotes they used. "It's not hate, it's clarity," she'd said at brunch. Grace's legal rationale was excerpted too, giving context to the court showdown. David remained upstairs, distant. She sensed his absence more than heard it. He'd been quiet since the sheriff's visit. That night, his place at the dinner table stayed empty. She could taste the guilt in the air, but he hadn't returned her call. Her phone buzzed a stream of notifications. Social media lit up, supportive posts, private messages. "You go, Margaret. Thank you for showing courage. Watching your strength inspires me." She paused on one from a woman she didn't know. "My daughter watched us both read this. You're giving us permission to speak up." Her throat tightened. Lily stepped into the room, phone in hand. "How's it landing?" Margaret asked. Lily scanned the screen. "Outside of a few trolls, it's all positive. People are stopping by, offering help. One group wants to host a financial wellness workshop with you." "Wow," Margaret breathed. Hope flickered beneath fatigue. "What's your plan?" Lily pressed. Margaret closed the laptop. "Write my own op-ed. Explain it all, what this land has meant, what this fight is about. Not just headlines." Lily nodded, excitement in her eyes. "Let's do it." They moved to the desk. Over the next hour, they drafted paragraphs. Margaret's life on the ranch, the silent negotiations, her decision to reclaim not just land but dignity. Lily, polished lines, smoothing tone, helping her mother bring home honesty with grace. By evening, a polished, heartfelt piece was ready. Grace called then, voice low but firm. "Court just escalated. Expect more filings. He's going to try turning public opinion against you." She paused. "Your op-ed needs to land before he does," Margaret replied, setting her jaw. "We post tomorrow morning." "Good," Grace agreed. "Keep ahead." The next day, the op-ed appeared on the Gazette's site and landed on the homepage of a regional news platform. It carried Margaret's signature line, "I'm not waging war on my family, I'm raising legacy standards." Responses poured in again, supportive, earnest, emotional. Lily read aloud a few. "You gave me courage to stand up to my own past." This quote, legacies, standards, that's going in my mind. Margaret closed her eyes, letting each note sink in, but then her phone vibrated. She looked down, a notification from Instagram. It opened to show a story from David's fiancée, a video, blurry, with angry overlay text. "Don't be cashing in, shameful betrayal." She threw funds, sold out her son. It looped for a few seconds. Margaret let it play, face calm but strained. Lily saw her stare. "Ignore it," she said. Margaret's hand hovered above the screen. She didn't repost or respond. She didn't share. Once, she might have. Now, she chose silence. The public voices meant something. Privileged, envy, or spite meant nothing. She turned off her phone and breathed. Let them show themselves, she said softly. Lily reached across and squeezed her hand. We keep going. Margaret nodded. Or we step forward. She typed a quiet reply under the fiancé's story. Truth isn't cash, it's clarity. Then deleted it. She couldn't engage with that. Instead, she posted a link to her op-ed to her page. Thank you for the stories, the doors, the solidarity, and paused, then clicked share. Silence settled again, the last light of the day stretching across the ranch horizon beyond the window. Just after she pressed share, her phone buzzed again. A new message from David. Margaret froze, thumb hovering above the screen. What he typed next would change everything. My chest tightened under stress. I could no longer ignore it. Margaret stretched her arm to reach for her phone, but her chest constricted first. A sharp pinch beneath her ribs, just enough to pull her attention from the kitchen chaos. She paused, heart pounding. Lily emerged from the living room, brows knit with concern. Mom, you okay? Margaret exhaled, pressing a hand to her side. Just ... an ache. But the words felt hollow. She'd been brushing off fatigue for days, overriding her instincts with deadlines and court filings. Lily stayed near, her presence steady. Maybe we should go in. Margaret shook her head. Just an ache. But her voice cracked. Later that afternoon, she sat in Dr. Nugent's office, legs swinging slightly on the edge of the examination table. The walls were calm. No ranch. Here just crisp white and reassurance. She described the tightness as best she could. Sudden, middle of paperwork, slow release. The doctor frowned. Attentive. Let's run some tests. CCG blood work. Stress can mimic heart issues. Margaret nodded. Okay. Minutes later, she lay under a machine's beeping rhythm. Outside, Lily watched through glass, phone in hand but eyes on her mother. She'd been shielding the older woman for once, child leading. When the tests finished, Dr. Nguyen sat behind his desk. His expression was firm, balance between caution and calm. The good news: your heart rhythm looks normal. No signs of blockage, but stress markers are elevated. Your blood pressure and cortisol are high. Not dangerous yet, but if left unchecked, this could escalate. Margaret swallowed. So ... slow down, not stop, he clarified. Adjust, manage, rest periods, breathing exercises, limit adrenaline triggers when possible. Lily exhaled softly. I'll help. Margaret reached for her daughter's hand. Thank you. That evening, Grace arrived at the house, carrying a briefcase and a calm urgency. She found Margaret in the den, still processing the visit. How are you feeling? Grace asked. Margaret tapped her chest, then her wrist, like a warning light. Grace nodded and opened her briefcase. I spoke with another in case. I've arranged backup coverage for Friday's closing. Medical or not, the buyer is ready. Timeline holds. Margaret nodded. Relief and tension tangled. Thank you for thinking ahead. No contingencies, Grace replied. We're still on course, but prioritize you. Margaret closed her eyes. I will. I vow to finish this, but not at the cost of collapse. Later, Lily curled on the sofa beside her mother, notebook in hand. Let's schedule weekend rest, fresh air, maybe walks with tea. Margaret nodded, tapping her pen. She charted her schedule: lawyer calls, court prep, closing coordination, and wove in gaps. Sunday morning off, afternoon walk, meditation each day. Grace reviewed the plan from her phone. Good. And I'll check in midweek. Margaret's breath lengthened. She felt both fragile and fortified. Adaptation, not quitting, was her choice. The next morning, the phone buzzed across the counter. Margaret picked it up. The screen showed the buyer's agent. Final paperwork is ready. Closing is Friday at 2 p.m. Bank confirmed funds were set. Margaret felt a surge of triumphant relief and terror. The finish line was in sight. Lily appeared behind her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. You ready? Margaret's heart tightened again, but this time with purpose. I am, she said, voice steady. She put the phone down, leaning into Lily. We finish it. Sunlight filtered through the windows, dappling the kitchen into gold. Her phone buzzed again, this time an incoming SMS from David. She unlocked the screen. Friday's closing complicates things. We need to talk. Margaret felt the weight in her chest shift steadily forward. Asterisk in the final negotiation call. Every word felt decisive. Margaret's morning began with a single ding from her phone. Thebuyersagent.com, but precise. Need final inspection adjustments. Minor roof flashing, and porch railing need quotes. The tone was gentle but firm. This was the last gate before closing. She steeled herself. Lily pressed her hand in solidarity. You got this. Margaret inhaled. Let's handle it. She called Grace. Minutes later, Grace arrived with her laptop open and files pinned tight. They moved to the kitchen table, papers strewn like battle plans. Margaret explained the request. Grace tapped through the contract, marking margins. This is standard, she said. But after everything, we respond swiftly. They sketched a reply, outlining a licensed contractor, quote, and a timeline inspected by Tuesday, resolved by Thursday. Margaret hit send. No more than a minute later, her phone buzzed. A message from Lena. Tell buyer, they should pull your drama, will scare them. The tone was clipped, threatening. She meant well. Maybe. Margaret's fingers curled around her mug. She didn't WRITE back. Instead, she responded to the buyer. Inspection acknowledged. We're securing quotes and scheduling repairs. Commitment stands. Silence. Then. Thank you. We're ready to close as soon as items are resolved. Grace closed her laptop. Good. You neutralized that. The day stretched taut. The inspection contractor arrived at midday, walking the porch and roof quietly, clipboard tapping. Margaret hovered, coffee in hand, heart pounding but quiet inside. The inspector nodded at the flashing and railing, then at Margaret. Shouldn't be more than a few hundred to fix. I'll file the invoice tomorrow morning. Lily squeezed her shoulder. Margaret smiled through exhale. Thank you. The afternoon felt suspended, the final countdown before the finish line. At 3 p.m., her phone buzzed again. Buyer's agent, repairs look good. New settlement figures sent via email. Her pulse spiked. Grace opened the message. Final. Adjustment just under the expected margin. Acceptable. No hesitation. Grace tapped approve on behalf of Margaret. Margin holds. Adjustments included. Closing confirmed. Margaret let a breath go she'd forgotten to release. She reached out and clasped Lily's hand. We did it. Grace raised an eyebrow. You closed, not just fought. Margaret nodded. Tears pricked relief and pride woven tight. Feels like more than closing. Later that afternoon, Margaret sat in the notary's office, signing document after document, title transfer, escrow agreement, closing disclosures. Her pen strokes were calm, precise. She refused to rush. Each mark felt like reclaiming her life. The notary handed her the final stack. She closed the folder and exhaled, her signature settling like a foundation stone. Lily, seated beside her, squeezed her hand. Margaret looked at her daughter. Ready? Lily nodded, voice thick. Let's finish this. They walked outside together. The for sale by owner sign still stood, dates and details, hazy in the bright afternoon sun. The buyer's agent held keys and smiled gently at Margaret. Congratulations. Margaret took the keys. They were heavy-weighty with everything she'd built and released. Grace appeared, carrying one copy of the closing folder. She looked at Margaret, something soft in her eyes. You're done. You can step away now. Margaret faced the ranch, land rolling golden behind her. I am. Lily wrapped her arm around her. Margaret felt the catch in her throat. She looked down to see her phone buzzing again. David's name flashed. She opened it. I won't forget. This, no storm, just a promise. Margaret paused, thumb hovering over the message. She felt the moment's depth and accusation, but also a recognition. She looked at Grace, who offered a subtle nod of solidarity. Margaret pocketed the phone without reply. She turned to the buyer's agent. When would you like the sign taken down? Agent glanced at the keys. Whenever you're ready. Margaret gave a small, firm nod. Now. They watched as the agent removed the sign. Its wooden stake came free with a soft pop. Lily inhaled the air deeply. Margaret felt a tremor of finality and hope. The keys jingled in her hand. The land behind them exhaling in quiet surrender. And then a gentle knock at the front door. Margaret froze, heart skipping. She opened it, heard a familiar voice. Mama. He stood at the porch, defeated words caught in his throat. Margaret paused just inside the open front door, keys clasped in her hand. The afternoon sun softened over the porch. There, framed by the ranch's metal and memory, stood David. His coat was still damp. The rain had returned, but so had something else, a thin humility. He looked fragile, stripped of his usual polish. His eyes flicked up to meet hers, found only her calm. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, shoulders slumped, confession hanging in the air. Then, Margaret, his voice cracked. The single word felt raw, stripped of adornment. Margaret didn't invite him in. She didn't close the door either. Instead, she held her ground. He took a step forward. I am sorry for everything. The sale, the lawsuit, the brinkmanship. It wasn't just business. I lost sight. Lily emerged behind Margaret, arms folded, but presence strong. David's gaze shifted, landing on her. Even in her quiet stance, Lily held gravity, witness and guard. David swallowed. I see it now. The stress, the breach. It broke more than a deal. And I regret that. Margaret took a breath. She didn't speak. Her silence held the power. David's shoulders sagged further. He drummed his fingers on the porch railing. I thought I needed control, but seeing you close that door, I realized I'd been fighting ghosts. Lily's gaze softened, but she stayed silent. Margaret finally spoke. Thank you. Her voice was low, but weighted. Your apology matters. He blinked back vulnerability. I brought something. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Rent. Seriously. It's what I should have done the moment this became mine too. His hand trembled as he offered the note amount and terms, handwritten, precise and quiet. Margaret looked at the offer. Her heart pinched. This was unexpected, practical, and honest. But she folded her arms. I appreciate the gesture, but I'm selling it, David. It's closing, no ownership, no rent. His face flickered surprise, then acceptance. David nodded once, voice unsteady. I understand. They stood there, rain tapping the boards like hesitant applause. Behind them, Grace emerged from the foyer, silent and steady. She reached into her bag and produced an envelope thick with papers. He withdrew the lawsuit this morning. Official paperwork is on your desk. Margaret glanced at David. He nodded quietly. Grace handed the envelope to Margaret, eyes flicking to him. Closed. No further action. Margaret slid the envelope into her purse. Relief and finality mingled in her chest. David exhaled a breath. He must have held for too long. He closed his eyes for a second. I'm proud of you, he whispered almost to himself. Lily placed a hand on Margaret's back. Margaret pressed her daughter's hand, offering strength. David shifted his weight, looking up. I'll give you space. He paused. He cleared his throat. Thank you for stepping up, for all of it. Margaret nodded softly. No words came. They weren't needed. David turned slowly. He took a step off the porch, rain washing over him. Then he paused again, hand raised a silent salutation. Then he left. Bafta closed the door gently behind him. The latch clicked into place, a quiet finality. Inside, the ranch felt still, alive, but paused. She turned to Lily, eyes soft. He's leaving, Lily said gently. Margaret whispered, yes. She moved to the front door and opened it again. David's figure was just fading at the end of the walk. She watched until he stepped into the green blur, then turned back. Margaret then stepped to the lock set. She slid the bolt across, snug. Lily watched, breath held. Margaret locked the door. She turned and met her daughter's eyes. Our ministry begins now. Lily nodded, expression bright with unshed tears. They walked together back to the porch, side by side, the wind carrying a new, quiet promise. Margaret's hand rested on the locked door, steel and peace. As they stepped toward the house, the first bell of that old church across the field tumbled over the wind. Stepping into my new place, I realized for the first time I'm free. Margaret turned the key in the lock of the compact cottage at the edge of town. She paused, inhaling the quiet. 2 walls, a window, a front door, empty but alive with possibility. The realtor's words echoed. Cozy, manageable, yours. She stepped inside. Sunlight pooled on the hardwood floors. The smell of fresh paint and promise made her chest ease. She set down her box labeled essentials. Then another marked memory. Exposed beams crowned the ceiling. A small kitchen appeared immediately to her right. To her left, a living area seemed to await life. The doorbell rang sharp and light. She opened the door to find neighbors on the porch. Mary from across the street, holding a bowl of homemade cookies. Tom and Elise, brandishing a potted fern. Their smiles were shy but genuine. We just wanted to welcome you, Mary said. You've waited a long time. Margaret smiled back, warm and unguarded. Thank you. It means more than you know. They stepped in, placing gifts on the counter. Mary draped a soft throw over a chair. Tom inspected the kitchen tile. Elise exclaimed over the space's brightness. They lingered, chatting about local bakery hours and the community garden. Margaret listened, vending small stories. The air here didn't fade with land debts or court dates. It carried fresh starts. After they left, she wandered through room by room, unboxing kitchenware, mugs from Jenna, a set of tea towels Lily had embroidered. She placed the fern by the window, its green fronds like a hopeful stitch. On the kitchen island stood an envelope, cream-colored with elegant script. It read, "For your next chapter, with no expectations." Inside was a note in David's handwriting, wishing you peace. No explanations, just hope. She paused, a question tapping at her chest, then placed the card on the shelf above the sink. It stayed there unexplained, but not unwelcome. Moments later, Grace appeared at the door with a manila folder and a warm loaf of sourdough. "You closed," Grace said simply, handing over the documents and stepping inside. Margaret sank onto the couch, papers rustled quietly, all the final closing deeds. "Properties off your plate," Grace said, setting the folder beside her. "Clean, complete." Margaret exhaled. "Clean," she echoed, voice soft. Grace placed a hand on her shoulder. "Now, let it be you." Outside, a breeze rattled the leaves. Inside, a chapter solidified. Later that evening, Lily joined her at the small dining table. A laptop sat open. "Mom," Lily said, "you should blog it. Write about your journey, your voice, your freedom." Her eyes glowed. "People will want to read it." Margaret looked at the screen blank cursor, blinking gently. She thought of every moment. The ranch sunsets, courtrooms, release. The ache of absence, the swirl of reclaiming. "I'll try," she said. Lily scooted in beside her, offering quiet support. Margaret placed her fingertips on the keys and typed the first sentence. "Today I moved into my own story." She paused, feeling the weight, but also the traction. She continued, line by line, her voice steady, each word a footstep into freedom. By midnight, the post was done, honest, layered, hopeful. She reviewed it once, then hit publish. She leaned back, stillness settling round her like a soft cloak. The next morning, as sunlight sliced through the clean window, she moved to pour coffee. Her reflection shimmered. A woman in a simple sweater. Hair tucked behind her ear, no pearls, no court docket, just herself. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a comment notification under her new post. She opened it. "Thank you." The words pulsed across her screen, not grand, just two simple words that held universes. Margaret smiled, quiet but full. She closed her eyes, letting them echo in her chest. She crossed to the window and looked out at the small yard, the budding garden plot, the path of dusty earth leading away. She whispered to herself, "This is real." A second message came through, her first direct note from a reader, beginning with, "Your courage gave me." He said, "I was disposable today. I know I'm indispensable." Late afternoon sun filtered through lace curtains as Margaret poured tea into delicate porcelain cups. The small gathering gathered in her cozy living room. Lily perched on the arm of the couch, Grace beside her, Mary and Elise near the window. Across the room, David stood quietly, holding a cup at his chest, watching but not intruding. The scent of chamomile and fresh cookies mingled. Conversations wandered, gardening tips, local news soft and unpressured. Margaret smiled gently. The warmth of this new home lodged in her chest. Lily cleared her throat. "I wrote something," she said, unfolding a sheet of paper. She stepped forward, eyes bright and steady. "This is for you." She began to read. "Mom, you taught me strength isn't about silence. It's about standing when the ground shakes. You made us believe in our roots by holding tight and knowing when to let go." Margaret's throat caught, heads turned toward her. Even David's gaze softened. Lily finished, folding the paper with care. "Thank you," Margaret whispered, "for hearing and holding me." David set his cup down with a soft thud. He cleared his throat. "May I?" He raised his cup in a small toast to Margaret, who discovered she wasn't disposable and reminded us generosity isn't weakness. He nodded to Grace and Lily, then to Margaret. Grace stood and raised her teacup too. To courage and boundaries. Voices followed, cups rising around a quiet circle of support. Margaret lifted her cup, eyes glistening. "Thank you, all of you, for belief, for presence, for healing." Her words wove through the room like gentle light. David's face was still reserved, not triumphant, just respectful. He lingered by the doorway, observing rather than participating. Lily caught his eye and gave a small nod. He offered a tight smile in return. Grace spoke again. You know, this moment isn't the ending, it's the beginning. Her eyes found Margaret's. How about writing your story? For others who haven't realized they're essential. Margaret looked around the room. Each person present held a mirror to her journey. She set her cup down softly. I will. The words surprised her in their assurance. I'll write for those who think they don't belong to their own lives. Lily placed her hand over Margaret's. Margaret met her daughter's gaze, her steady, supportive anchor. They shared a silent understanding. This was more than transition. It was purpose. Outside, the sun began to dip. Margaret moved to the front door and opened it, letting the golden light spill inside. She stood in the threshold, breathing in the evening air, savoring the gentle hush of her own land, her own life. She turned back inside, finding Grace smoothing a blanket over the couch and Lily stacking cups again. David lingered by the mantel, his eyes on a framed photo of Margaret at the ranch last summer, arms open to the sky, unguarded. Margaret walked toward him. He met her halfway. She extended her hand not for reconciliation, but for acknowledgement. He took it. No words were necessary. Grace moved beside her. The three shared a quiet moment. This was the circle she'd created, boundaries held, respect earned, legacy rebuilt. Later, when the guests left, shoes tucked by the door, soft murmurs, fading. Margaret lingered in the kitchen, the kettle set idle, the cups washed. She wandered back to the living room, where the last rays of sunset lingered. Lily found her there and slipped in beside her. They watched the dusk deepen. Legacy, Lily said softly. Margaret nodded. She reached for her daughter's hand, squeezing firmly, reclaimed. Together, they walked to the front door. Margaret shut it gently and flicked the deadbolt home secure. In the last glow of sunset, she stepped onto the porch. The sky was rose and gold, the evening calm. Her chest lifted, breath deep. She touched the wood of the door, felt its smooth strength, felt her own. Margaret stood there, hand resting on the locked door, sunrise behind her. She smiled softly at whatever dawn would bring, free, rooted, indispensable.